So I know lately I've been talking about specific games or specific companies, but this one, it's more just this general feeling, and it's that a lot of things have gotten more expensive. And not just in an obvious prices went up kind of way, but in a way where it actually changes how you think about buying anything nowadays. And I think a good place to start is just everyday stuff. For some people, that's fast food because that's one of the easiest places to notice it. Especially with something like McDonald's, where the whole identity used to be built around being cheap and quick and easy. You didn't have to really think that much about it. You just go order something and it was understood that it wasn't going to cost much. I actually made a video about this. I'll throw a link in the description if anyone wants to go watch it. But now when you go, it's one of those moments where you actually look at the total and hesitate for a second. And not because it's insanely expensive compared to everything else, but it's insanely expensive compared to what it used to be, and it's not really matching what you expected to be. And that disconnect really stands out. It's not just fast food either, it kind of shows up everywhere. Subscriptions are a big one, because it used to be that you'd maybe have one or two things you paid for monthly and that was it. But now it feels like everything's a subscription, everything's a service, whether it's games, streaming, music, or even just random services you forget you signed up for. And each one on its own doesn't seem like a lot, but when you stack them together, it starts to feel like you're constantly paying for access to things instead of just owning them. And that changes how you think about value, because you're not making one decision now, you're making a bunch of small ones over time. And games are a really interesting example of this as well, because on one hand, a lot of games offer more content than they used to, especially live service games, but on the other hand, they're also designed in a way where you're encouraged to keep spending over time, whether that's subscribing to these battle passes, cosmetics, expansions, pay to play, whatever system they're using. So instead of just buying a game once and being done with it, you're kind of entering into an ongoing relationship with it, where there's always something else you could buy, even if you don't technically need to. It's not always a bad thing, because sometimes you do get a lot of value out of it, especially if you really like the game a lot and it's a game you play a lot. But it does make the overall experience feel more expensive in a different way, because the spending doesn't really have a clear endpoint sometimes. And definitely outside of digital stuff, you see this shift in how things are priced and packaged, where it feels like the baseline just has moved up. What used to be considered a cheap option is now more in the middle, and the actual cheap options either don't exist or feel like they've been scaled really far back in quality. And that's where it starts to feel a bit different, because it's not just about numbers going up, but the role those things used to play. Like, fast food used to be the easy, low-cost choice. Certain games used to be a one-time purchase. And now these categories don't really feel that clearly defined anymore. And I think part of why this stands out so much is because expectations haven't really adjusted at the same speed. So you still go into these situations thinking of them as the way they used to be, and then you're reminded that they don't really fit that anymore. That creates this weird feeling where nothing seems outrageously expensive on its own, but everything feels just a bit higher than you would expect, and it's adding up a lot over time. And another thing that plays into this is how normalized it's becoming, because you get used to seeing higher prices, you get used to these subscription models, in-game purchases, and after a while it stops really feeling unusual, even if it does feel slightly off to you. So instead of reacting strongly to any one change here, you're kind of just adapting to them all pretty gradually, and that makes it harder to point to a single moment where these things started shifting, because it happened over a long period of time really. And at the same time, companies are also trying to balance this, because they know people are more sensitive to pricing now, so sometimes you'll see things like deals, bundles, limited time offers, or discounts that are designed to make the cost feel more reasonable, even if the underlying price is higher than it used to be. And this all adds another layer to it, because now you're not just deciding whether something is worth it, but you're also deciding whether it's worth it right now and if you should wait for a better deal. And that really changes the way people approach buying things in general. And it kind of turns everything into even more of a calculation than it used to be, whether you're thinking about value in a more active way or just making quick decisions. And I think that's really the main difference. It's not just that things cost more, even though that is the case. It's that you're more aware of what you're spending and how often you're spending it now, because it happens across so many different areas at once. And that awareness really makes things even feel more expensive, even if the actual increase isn't huge in any one place. But don't get me wrong, there are some places where the increase is massive. And at the same time, there are still ways to get good value out of things, whether it's finding these deals or sticking to a few things you actually use a lot, or just being very selective. But that requires a lot more effort than that you used to, and you have to be a lot more careful nowadays, I feel like. And that shift toward being more intentional with spending is probably one of the biggest changes, because it used to be easier to just go with whatever was convenient without thinking too much about the price. But now convenience itself seems like it comes with a higher cost, which kind of changes how appealing it is. And when people say everything feels more expensive, I think a lot of it is the actual prices, because the actual prices have gotten ridiculous. If you just look at the numbers, they have changed so much. But it's also about how these prices fit into our expectations, our habits, and the way things are structured now. Because all that combined change, and it changes how it feels, even if you can't always point to one specific reason why. And to continue on these ideas about everything being more expensive, once you start noticing it, really, it's not always just about the price itself, but just how the value feels. And that's where things are getting a little harder to explain, but also more noticeable with time. And what I mean by that is, it's not always that something is outrageously priced. It's that when you actually get it, it doesn't feel like it matches what you paid in the same way that it used to. And it can happen for a bunch of different reasons depending on what you're looking at. Going back to something simple like McDonald's, like I mentioned before, it's not just that the total cost is higher, and it's also that the experience is kind of more minimal at the same time. It's more automated, the menu's more streamlined, the overall visit is quicker, but it's much less memorable than it used to be. The colors are bland, it's kind of this boring look. Again, I made a video about this. I will link it in the description if anyone's interested. But what you end up doing is paying for something that feels more basic, and it doesn't really seem like you're paying for anything more. In fact, you're kind of paying more for less, I feel like. And you see a similar thing with a lot of other areas too, especially anything that's been optimized over time, where the focus has been on efficiency, consistency, and so on, which makes sense from a business perspective, but from a customer perspective, it can feel like things have been very flattened out a bit. Everything works, everything's reliable, but it also feels a lot more standardized, and that can make it harder for something to stand out or actually go out of your way for. Shows up in a lot of digital stuff as well, especially with games and services, where you're technically getting more content or more features, but they've often delivered in smaller pieces over time and sometimes locked behind different systems or tiers or subscriptions or whatever. So instead of making a clear purchase, it's more like a series of small decisions, and that can make the overall cost really add up. And it's not even as one singular total now, you have to think about it in parts. And these parts add up in ways that aren't immediately obvious, which is probably part of the trick and how they get you. But at this point, I think they've gotten us so used to it where we just click through things. Another thing that contributes to this is how often things can be framed as optional, because a lot of modern systems are built around the idea that you don't have to spend extra money, but you should. It's there if you want to. Technically that's true, but at the same time, those optional purchases are often designed to feel like a natural extension of the experience, so it doesn't always feel like a separate decision, more like it feels like part of how the system works. Over time, that blurs the line between what's included and what's extra, because the base experience might feel a little more limited without those additions, even if it's still functional on its own. Think of membership saying, you can use these features, but there's a bunch more if you get the premium, stuff like that. And I think that's where a lot of the "this doesn't feel worth it" sentiment comes from, because people don't just compare the price to product, but they're also comparing their current experience to what they remember or expect, and those don't really line up, and it stands out. Expectations play a huge role in all of this as well, because even if something is objectively fine, if it doesn't meet the expectation people had going into it, it can feel disappointing in a way that's hard to quantify. Overall, I just feel like things have changed so much. Prices have spiked up so much. Things that used to be seen as pretty cheap and affordable are now so ridiculous. And then there's other things too, like the housing market. You could reasonably buy a house within a relatively good amount of time, but nowadays you have to really save for it. You have to put down a decent bit of money. You have to make a ton of very hefty payments. Buying even a simple house or living in an apartment has gotten so expensive, even when you're not in the wealthier areas. And God forbid you're in a wealthy area, because my gosh, you are spending so much money just to stay in a higher income area. But at the same time, you don't want to be in a lower income area where it could be dangerous for you. It just really bothers me that everything has gotten so expensive, and it's gotten a lot harder to do things that you need to do and to live the way you need to. A lot of necessities are getting a lot pricier. Groceries are going up. Restaurants are getting ridiculous, actually so crazy. Every place is asking you to tip them nowadays. Everyone is relying more and more on these deals to save them because they can't always afford things on a normal price. Every day, income that was good is getting worse and worse. Now it's just becoming mediocre, and the bad income back then is now pretty much unlivable. Truly, if you take a step back, you have to really realize it's hard out there. Things are tough. It is getting harder to afford things, to buy things. Insurances are getting expensive. Subscriptions are all over the place. Price increases are everywhere. And what worries me a little bit is I spoke to a pretty knowledgeable economist with a degree and so on, and they told me that they don't really know what the solution could even be to this, and they're telling me that they hope that there can be a solution found, but they don't really know how one would go about fixing this. Of course, we can theorize and think all day, but we won't truly know until we actually try something. And let's not even get started on colleges. Colleges have gotten so expensive that I'm pretty sure college in itself is a business. There's probably going to be a future video coming about that, actually. What's especially rough is you have to make sure you get the right degree or the right majors, because at this point, some majors are so poor in the job market that you can hardly find a job and then a high-paying job on top of it. It really just bothers me because I remember when you could go to McDonald's and get like a $1 McChicken, or you could go to Subway and get a footlong sub for $5. And nowadays when you go, the footlong sub's like $11, the McChicken's $3.50, $4. It's crazy. And actually, as a little aside, a lot of respect to Little Caesars, because Little Caesars has always kept their prices together despite all of this, and I'll probably make a future video about that as well. I just want you guys to know that it is important to save and try to invest what you can, because at this point it is getting harder, and it's hard out there, honestly. You want to make sure that you are financially responsible in a time where things keep going up and doesn't necessarily have a definite chance of going down. This could very well be permanent, and I'm afraid that things could get worse from here. But hey, time will tell, and maybe there'll be some very good reforms that could help us. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to get on here and talk about how expensive things have gotten and just give my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think and what your concerns are, or if you think what a possible solution could be.